The book A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. And it's describing here the arrival of Columbus and his ship to the island of Haiti, right, in Hispaniola. It says, in the transparent atmosphere of the tropics, objects are described at a great distance, and the purity of the air and serenity of the deep blue sky gave a magical effect to the scenery. Under these advantages, the beautiful island of Haiti revealed itself to the eye as they approached. Its mountains were higher and more rocky than those of the other islands, but the rocks reared themselves from among rich forests. The mountains swept down into luxuriant plains and green savannas, while the appearance of cultivated fields with the numerous fires at night and the columns of smoke which rose in various parts by day, all showed it to be populous. It rose before them in all the splendor of tropical vegetation, one of the most beautiful islands in the world, and doomed to be one of the most unfortunate, again, one of the most beautiful islands in the world, and doomed to be one of the most unfortunate. In the evening of the 6th of December, Columbus entered a harbor at the western end of the island, to which he gave the name of St. Nicholas, by which it is called at the present day. The harbor was spacious and deep, surrounded with large trees, many of them loaded with fruit, while a beautiful plain extended in front of the port, traversed by a fine stream of water. From the number of canoes seen in various parts, there were evidently large villages in that neighborhood, but the natives had fled with terror at sight of the ships. Leaving the harbor of St. Nicholas on the 7th, they coasted along the northern side of the island. It was lofty and mountainous, but with green savannas and long sweeping plains. At one place they caught a view of a rich and smiling valley that ran far into the interior between two mountains and appeared to be in a high state of cultivation. For several days they were detained in a harbor which they called Port Concepcion. A small river emptied into it. After winding through a delightful country, the coast abounded with fish, some of which even leaped into their boats. They didn't even have to fish. The abundance. That sounds biblical to me, scriptural. Fish multiplying, right? Just jumping into your boat. Alright? The land of plenty. They cast their nets, therefore, and caught great quantities, and among them several kinds similar of those of Spain. The first fish they had met with resembling those of their own country. They heard also the notes of the birds which they mistook for their nightingale, and of several others to which they were accustomed. These, by the simple associations of idea which speak to the heart, reminded them strongly of the groves of their distant Andalusia. They fancied the features of the surrounding country resembled those of the more beautiful provinces of Spain, and in consequence of this idea, the admiral named the island Hispaniola.
It says here, page 237, book 4, chapter 1, first landing of Columbus in the New World. It was on the morning of Friday, 12th of October, 1492, that Columbus first beheld the New World. When the day dawned, he saw before him a level and beautiful island, several leagues in extent, of great freshness and verdure, and covered with trees like a continual orchid. As they approached the shores, they were refreshed by the sight of the ample forest, which in those climates have extraordinary beauty of vegetation. Vegetation, you hear that? They beheld fruits of tempting hue, but unknown kind, growing among the trees which overhung the shores. You see all the fruits that just grow naturally and wild. So they were encountering this paradise, right? Columbus was like, I made it. He's like, this is the Eden. You're going to see what he's going to describe, but, you know, imagine what they were seeing in those times when they got there. They beheld fruits, again, of tempting hue, but unknown kind, growing among the trees, which overhung the shores. The purity and suavity of the atmosphere, the crystal transparency of the seas which bathe these islands, give them a wonderful beauty and must have had their effect upon the unsusceptible feelings of Columbus. Chapter 2, Cruise among the Bahama Islands. On leaving San Salvador, Columbus was at loss which way to direct his course. He beheld a great number of beautiful islands, green and level and fertile. Again, A lot of beautiful islands, green and level and fertile, inviting him in different directions. So on the next island that Columbus went to, he called it Fernandina, and still in the Bahama Islands, right? He says here, it says here, while the man had landed with the cask in search of water, says Columbus, he refreshed himself under the shade of the groves, which he says were more beautiful than any he had ever beheld. The country was as fresh and green as in the month of May in Andalusia, talking about Spain. The trees, the fruits, the herbs, the flowers, the very stones for the most part, as different from those of Spain, as night from day, the fruits of their fields and groves, the cotton which was their article of greatest value, and their domesticated parrots. When the Spaniards landed in search of water, they took them to the coolest springs, the sweetest and freshest runs, filling their casks, rolling them up to the boats, and seeking in every way to gratify their celestial visit. So continuing the book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. Now Columbus, again, he's still in the Bahama Islands. He's cruising all these little islands there, and he lands on another one, and he names it Isabella, right? So it says here, delightful as were the others he had visited, he declares that this surpasses them all. Like those, it was covered with trees and shrubs and herbs of unknown kind, and of rich tropical vegetation. The climate had the same soft temperature. The air was delicate and balmy. The land was higher, with a fine bird and hill. The coast of fine sand gently laved by transparent billows. Columbus was enchanted by the lovely scenery of this island. I know not, says he, where first to go, nor are my eyes ever weary of gazing on the beautiful verdure. Verdure. At the southwest end of the island, he found fine lakes, fresh water, overhung with groves, and surrounded by banks covered with herbage. Here he ordered all the casks of the ships to be filled. Here are large lakes, says he in his journal, and the groves about them are marvelous. You hear that? Groves about them are marvelous. And here in all the island, everything is green, and the herbage as in April in Andalusia. The singing of the birds is such that it seems as if one would never desire to depart hence. Hear what he's saying? But where you, your place, your home, there are flocks of parrots which obscure the sun, and other birds, large and small, of so many kinds and so different from ours, that it is wonderful. And beside, there are trees of 1,000 species, each having its particular fruit. Again, you're just walking in the island everywhere, and there are trees of 1,000 species, each having its particular fruit and all of marvelous flavor, so that I am in the greatest trouble in the world not to know them, for I am very certain that they are each of great value. I shall bring home some of them as specimens, and also some of the herbs. Columbus was intent on discovering the drugs and spices of the East, and on approaching this island had fancied and perceived in the air which came from it the spicy odors said to be wasted from the island of the Indian seas. As I arrived at this cape, says he, there came thence a fragrance so good and soft of the flowers or trees of the land, that it was the sweetest thing in the world. I believe there are here many herbs and trees which would be of great price in Spain for tinctures, medicines, and spices, but I know nothing of them, which gives me great vexation. The fish which abounded in these seas partook of the novelty which characterized most of the objects in this new world. So continuing in the book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. Now Columbus, again, he's leaving the Bahamas and he's actually approaching Cuba now. So let's hear what he has to say about Cuba. It says here, as he approached this noble island, he was struck with its magnitude and the grandeur of its features, its high and airy mountains, which reminded him of those of Sicily, its fertile valleys, again, its fertile valleys, and long sweeping plains watered by noble rivers, its stately forests, its bold promontories, and stretching headlands which melted away into the remotest distance. he anchored in a beautiful river, free from rocks or shoals or transparent water, its banks overhung with trees. Here, landing and taking possession of the island, he gave it the name of Juana, in honor of Prince Juan, and to the river the name of San Salvador. He proceeded for some distance up the river, more and more enchanted with the beauty of the country. The forests which covered each bank were of high and wide spreading trees, some bearing fruits, others flowers, while in some both fruit and flower were mingled, thus speaking a perpetual round of fertility. Again, bespeaking a perpetual round of fertility. Among them were many palms, but different from those of Spain and Africa. Again, there was a lot of palm trees here, but very different from those of Spain and Africa. The continual elegies made by Columbus on the beauty of the scenery were warranted by the kind of scenery he was beholding. There is a wonderful splendor, variety, and luxuriance in the vegetation of those quick and ardent climates. The verdure of the groves and the colors of the flowers and blossoms derive a vividness to the eye from the transparent purity of the air and the deep serenity of the azure heavens. The forests, too, are full of life, swarming with birds of brilliant plumage. Painted varieties of parrots and woodpeckers create a glitter amidst the verdure of the grove, and the hummingbirds rove from flower to flower, resembling, as has well been said, animated particles of a rainbow. The scarlet flamingos, too, seen sometimes through an opening of a forest in a distant savanna, have the appearance of soldiers drawn up in battalion, with an advance scout on the alert to give notice of approaching danger. Nor is the least beautiful part of the animated nature the various tribes of insects that people every plant, displaying brilliant coat of mail which sparkle to the eye like precious gems. Such is the splendor of animal and vegetable creation in these tropical climates, where an ardent sun imparts, in a manner, his own luster to every object and quickens nature into exuberant fecundity. Continuing about Cuba, Columbus says, when speaking of some lovely scene among the groves or along the flowery shore of this favored island, he says one could live there forever. Cuba broke out upon him like an Elysium. It is the most beautiful island, he says, that eyes ever beheld, full of excellent ports and profound rivers. The climate was more temperate here than in other islands, the nights being neither hot nor cold, while the birds and grasshoppers sang all night long. Indeed, there is a beauty in a tropical night in the depth of a dark blue sky, the lambent purity of the stars and the resplendent clearness of the moon that spreads over the rich landscape and the balmy groves, a charm more touching than the splendor of the day. In the sweet smell of the woods and the odor of the flowers which loaded every breeze, Columbus fancied he perceived the fragrance of oriental spices, and along the shores he found shells of the kind of oyster which produces pearls. From the grass growing to the very edge of the water he inferred the peacefulness of the ocean, which bathes these islands, never lashing the shore with angry surges. Ever since his arrival among these Antilles, he had experienced nothing but soft and gentle weather, and he concluded that a perpetual serenity reigned over these happy seas.
Continuing with the book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, and we're in Cuba, talking about when he was there. And it says here, on their way back, and talking about the Spaniards, right? They, for the first time, witnessed the use of a weed. A weed, now listen to this, which the indigenous caprice of man has since converted into an universal luxury. In the defiance of the opposition of the senses, they beheld several of the native going about with firebrands in their hands and certain dried herbs. Dried herbs, so we're talking about a weed, now we're talking about dried herbs, which they rolled up. They rolled it up in a leaf, right? In a leaf, and lighting one end, put the other in their mouths, and continued exhaling and puffing out the smoke. So they were they were rolling up some herbs, right? Some dried herbs, weed that he just said, And they're explaining how they were puffing it, smoking it up, exhaling, puffing out the smoke. These rolls they called tobacco, so it was rolled in a tobacco leaf, but it was herbs they were rolling. They weren't smoking tobacco; they were just using the tobacco leaf to roll up herbs. Now, whether that's cannabis, marijuana, most likely, but I know that they also smoked other herbs, Native American or American natives, like sage and other herbs also, not just marijuana. All right, but over here we see a clear description of what they were doing, and they're clearly telling you what it is: dried herbs. A name since transferred to the plant which they were made. On their return to the ships, they gave favorable accounts of the beauty and fertility of the country. They had met with many hamlets, 4 or 5 houses well peopled, embowered among trees laden with unknown fruits of tempting hue and delightful flavor. Around them were fields planted with the aji, or sweet pepper, with potatoes, with maize or Indian corn, and with species of lupin or pulse. Now again, I want to remind everyone, if you saw my corn videos, they're referencing maize or Indian corn. That's the way they knew it as, because in Europe they already had a Turkish corn, Turkish wheat, which was maize, but that had been there from ancient times, that had come in through Asia. Continues, says there were fields also of a plant, the root whereof they made their cassava bread. Cassava. These with their fruits of their groves formed the principal food of the natives, who were extremely frugal and simple in their diet. There were vast quantities of cotton, some just sown, some in full grown, and some wrought into the yarn or into nets, of which they made their hammocks. So clothing too, right? Clothing, right? Of this there was great store, a lot of cotton, both wrought and unwrought, in their houses. They had seen many birds of rare plumage, but of unknown species, many ducks, several small partridges, and like Columbus they had heard the song of a bird, which they had mistaken for the nightingale. All that they had seen, however, betokened a primitive and simple state of society, for with all its beauty, the country was in a wild, uncultivated state, according to them. Wild, do they mean in a natural state, as it's supposed to be? What is uncultivated to them? In the book A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, says here, the Indians having now become more familiar with the Spaniards, and having in some measure recovered, and we're in Haiti here, we're talking about the Indians in Haiti, from their extreme fear, conducted them to their houses, and set before them cassava, or yuca, right? Manioc, bread, fish, roots, and fruits of various kinds of fruits. Learning from the interpreter that the Spaniards were fond of parrots, they brought great numbers of them, which they had domesticated, and indeed offered freely whatever they possessed. Okay, so very important here. I don't know if you caught that. So it says, learning from the interpreter. Remember, who was the interpreter? Luis de Torres and the others who spoke Hebrew. So, because of this Hebrew interpreter that Columbus brought with him, he was able to communicate with the Indians, and the Indians were able to see that the Spaniards enjoyed parrots. It's telling you right here, right? All right, so remember, interpreter, he brought a Hebrew interpreter, and Chaldean. So what are they speaking? Either Hebrew or Babylonian. Either way, they're communicating. This interpreter is communicating with these natives of Haiti. The great river which flowed through this valley was bordered with noble forests, among which were palms, bananas, and many trees covered with fruits and flowers. Again, we're in the book A History of Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. We're in Haiti here, and we're talking again that there was this great river which flowed through this valley, was bordered with noble forests, among which were palms, bananas, and many trees covered with fruits and flowers, with Hesperides, Hispaniola. The air was mild as in April. The birds sang all day long, and some were even heard in the night. So talking about Haiti in this book again, says, according to their accounts, the people of Haiti existed in that state of primitive and savage simplicity, which some philosophers have fondly pictured as the most enviable on earth. They envied you. They envied you, surrounded by natural blessings. You were surrounded by natural blessings without even a knowledge of artificial wants. The fertile earth produced the chief part of their food, almost without culture. Their rivers and seacoasts abounded with fish, and they caught the utia, the guana, and a variety of birds. This too being of their frugal and temperate habits was great abundance, and what nature furnished thus spontaneously they willingly shared with all the world. You hear this? What the nature gave to them, the Creator, what nature, Mother Nature, Hawa, furnishes thus spontaneously, they willingly shared with all the world. They were sharing with them. Hospitality, we are told, was with them a law of nature universally observed. There was no need of being known to receive its succors. Every house was as open to the stranger as his own. Columbus, too, in a letter to Luis de San Angel, observes, "True it is that after they felt confidence and lost their fear of us, they were so liberal with what they possessed, that it would not be believed by those who had not seen it. If anything was asked of them, they never said no, but rather gave it cheerfully, and showed it as much amity as if they gave their very hearts. And whether the thing were of value or of little price, they were content with whatever was given in return." Continuing in the book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, and still talking about the inhabitants of Haiti, says one of the most pleasing descriptions of the inhabitants of this island is given by old Peter Martyr, who gathered it, as he says, from the conversations of the admiral himself. "It is certain," says he, "that the land among these people is as common as the sun and water, and that mine and thine, the seeds of all mischief, have no place with them. They are content with so little, that in so large a country they have rather superfluity than scarceness, so that they seem to live in the golden world, without toil, living in open gardens." You hearing me, colored tribes of America, Hawa, so that they seem to live in the golden world. You lived in the golden world. Without toil, you are stressed out now, enslaved, you know, working under the system. You used to live in open gardens, living in open gardens, not entrenched with dikes, divided with hedges, or defended with walls. They deal truly with one another. You used to deal truly with one another, without laws, without books, and without judges, according to the Spaniards, right? They take him for an evil and mischievous man, who taketh pleasure in doing hurt to another. And albeit they delight not in superfluities, yet they make provision for the increase of such roots, whereof they make their bread, contented with such simple diet, whereby health is preserved and disease avoided. Whereby health is preserved and disease is avoided. They recognized why you were so healthy, because your diet was so natural, right? So healthy, so alkaline. Much of this picture may be overcolored by the imagination, but it is generally confirmed by contemporary historians. So it's not just Columbus sayings or ideas or these two Spaniards. All right. What we just read out about how they viewed you when they got to Haiti, how you were living in Eden. I'm telling you, that's what they're saying, that you were living like you were in the Garden of Eden, the golden world. So many fruits, abounded rivers, clean water. You had so little, but so much. You had so little, but you had so much. Right? So again, it is generally confirmed by contemporary historians. They all concur in representing the life of these islanders as approaching to the golden state of poetical felicity, living under the absolute but patriarchal and easy rule of their caciques, katsing, chief, and Hebrew, Katsin Katsi, Katsin Katsi, Arawakan, Taino. Free from pride, with few wants, an abundant country, a happily tempered climate, and a natural disposition to careless and indolent enjoyment. That was you. A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, and we're here reading about how Columbus' first voyage. He's still coasting along the coast of Hispaniola, or Haiti, and he's still trying to reach the so-called island of Barbecue, what the Indians are keep telling him. So he reaches an island lying opposite on the harbor of Concepcion, to which, from its abundance in turtle, he gave the name of Tortugas. The natives had fled to the rocks and forests, and alarm fires blazed along the heights, from which circumstance he inferred that they were more subject to invasion than the other islands. All right? The country was so beautiful that he gave to one of the valleys the name of Valle de Paraíso, or the Valley of Paradise, or Paradise Valley, right? Valle de Paraíso, and called a fine stream the Guadalquivir, after that renowned river which flows through some of the fairest provinces of Spain. Continuing in a history of the life and voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, says, the country, we're talking about Hispaniola, was finely diversified with lofty mountains and fine valleys which stretched away inland as far as the eye could reach. Inland, as the eye could reach. The mountains were of such easy ascent that the highest of them might be plowed with oxen, and the luxuriant growth of the forest manifested the fertility of the soil. Rich soil. The valleys were watered by numerous clear and beautiful streams. They appeared to be cultivated in many places, and to be fitted for grain, for orchards and pasturage. Again, they appeared to be cultivated in many, many places. So, this is a book called Select Letters of Christopher Columbus, with other original documents relating to his 4 voyages to the New World. Translated and edited by R.H. Major, FSA, etc., Keeper of the Department of Maps and Charts in the British Museum, and Honorable Secretary of the Royal Geographical Society. So again, this is a letter written by Columbus himself. We're talking about when he reached Hispaniola of Haiti, Santo Domingo. It says, these lands are high, and there are many very lofty mountains, with which the island of Setefre cannot be compared. They are all most beautiful, of 1,000 different shapes, accessible and covered with trees of 1,000 kinds of such great height that they seem to reach the skies. I am told that the trees never lose their foliage, and I can well understand it, for I observed that they were as green and luxuriant as in Spain in the month of May. Some were in bloom, others bearing fruit, and others wise according to their nature. The nightingale was singing, as well as other birds of 1,000 different kinds, and that in November, the month in which I myself was roaming amongst them. There are palm trees of 6 or 8 kinds, wonderful in their beautiful variety, but this is the case with all the other trees and fruits and grasses. So many different kinds, right? And all the other fruits. So many different kinds of one specific. So there's like different kinds of palm trees, different kinds of mango trees, different kinds of apple trees. You get it? So that's what he's saying. And grasses, meaning corns, wheats, right? Rice, whatever. Trees, plants, or fruits filled us with admiration. Again, the trees. So again, let's go back. So it says, but this is the case with all the other trees and fruits and grasses. Trees, plants, or fruits filled us with admiration. So much fruits and plants, right? Naturally growing there in Eden. It filled him with admiration. It contains extraordinary pine groves and very extensive plains, pine groves, cedar trees. There is also honey, a land of milk and honey, right? There is also honey, a great variety of birds and many different kinds of fruits. In the interior, there are many mines of metals and a population innumerable population. Hispaniola is a wonder Its mountains and plains and meadows and fields are so beautiful and rich for planting and sowing and rearing cattle of all kinds, and for building towns and villages. The harbors on the coast and the number and size and wholesome of the rivers, most of them bearing gold, surpass anything that would be believed by one who had not seen them. So Columbus, he's so in admiration, right? He's reached Eden in his eyes, the golden place, a terrestrial paradise, gold in the rivers, food all over the place. There is a great difference between the trees, fruits, and plants of this island and those of Juana, and he's talking about Cuba. So we already skipped that in this book, but we've already read, right? Cuba was full of trees and fruits as well. Thousands of them, hundreds of them. And so he's saying there's so many other trees in Hispaniola, different species. In this island, there are many spices and extensive mines of gold and other metals. Many spices. Again, in the book, Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with the original documents. In his second voyage, Columbus tells us when he was near two islands when he first got there, again to America, I believe it was Dominica and Marigalante, as he calls it. Marigalante, it's a different name now. But in regards to the island called Marigalante, he says, this island was filled with astonishingly thick growth of wood, the variety of unknown trees, some bearing fruit, and some flowers. Was surprising indeed, every spot was covered with verdure. We found there a tree whose leaf had the finest smells of cloves that I have ever met with. It was like a laurel leaf, but not so large. But I think it was a species of laurel. So again, that on his second voyage, after he went through the first couple of islands that he had actually not visited, it says all the above mentioned islands were discovered in this voyage. The admiral having seen nothing of them in his former voyage. They are all very beautiful and possess a most luxuriant soil, But this last island, they're talking about Puerto Rico, appeared to exceed all the others in beauty. Again, in the book, Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with the original documents from the Holyoke Society. Columbus, when he was in his second voyage, spending time in the settlement, I believe they called Isabela, or Ciudad Marta, which was in Hispaniola. He says this, he says, we have met with trees bearing wool, all right, trees bearing wool of a sufficiently fine quality, according to the opinion of those who are acquainted with the art, to be woven into good cloth. There are so many of these trees that we might load the caravel with wool, although it is troublesome to collect, for the trees are very thorny. But some means may be easily found of overcoming this difficulty. There are also cotton trees, as large as peach trees, which produce cotton in the greatest abundance, all right? Cotton in the greatest abundance, so clothing and all that, right? So just in case you didn't catch that, so we're talking about trees that gives out a type of wool that's separate from cotton trees, because we also got cotton trees in the greatest abundance. So these two types of trees, which maybe is two different types of cotton, all right? Again, he continues saying, we found trees producing wax, as good both in color and smell as beeswax, and equally useful for burning. Indeed, there is no great difference between them. There are vast numbers of trees which yield surprisingly fine turpentine, and a great abundance of tragacans, also very good. And again, in the book, Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with other original documents. This is a collection of the Holyoke Society in Columbus' own words here in his third voyage. He says, the Holy Scriptures record that our Lord made the earthly paradise and planted in it the tree of life, and then springs of a fountain from which the four principal rivers in the world take their source, namely the Ganges in India, the Tigris and Euphrates in his blank there, which rivers divide a chain of mountains and forming Mesopotamia, flow thence into Persia, and the Nile, which rises in Ethiopia and falls into the Sea of Alexandria. Columbus continues, I do not find, nor have ever found, any account by the Romans or Greeks which fixes in a positive manner the site of the terrestrial paradise. Neither have I seen it given in any map of Monde, any mappa mundi, laid down from authentic sources. So Columbus is saying, hey, nobody has really definitely said, hey, here is the Garden of Eden. It's right here, like for sure. He's saying no Romans, no Greeks, and it's not on any mappa mundi map. People still don't know. Some placed it in Ethiopia at the sources of the Nile. So which Ethiopia are we talking about? Others traversing all these countries found neither the temperature nor the altitude of the sun correspond with their ideas respecting it, nor did it appear that the overwhelming waters of the deluge had been there. All right, again, Columbus is telling you that when you go to all those places that that they just mentioned is the Garden of Eden, right? Like the Ganges, Mesopotamia, and the Nile and all that. If you go to the places where they say they are today, like Columbus is saying, you're not gonna find it there. All right, it says, while you traverse these countries, you found neither temperature nor the altitude of the sun to correspond with their ideas respecting it, or the Garden of Eden, right? Nor did it appear that the overwhelming waters of the deluge had been there. There's no signs of the flood on that side. We got much accounts of the flood over here in America. Some pagans pretended to adduce arguments to establish that it was in the Fortunate Islands, now called the Canaries. Then he saw that Bede Strabo and the master of scholastics history, with St. Ambrose and Scotus, and all the learned theologians agreed that the earthly paradise is in the east, etc. When you say the farthest east, if you keep going east, right, from Asia, where do you end up? The farthest east. That was always America, and that was the north, really. So Columbus is letting us know this, saying Isidori, Bede, Strabo, and the master of scholastic history, and with St. Ambrose and Scotus, all the learned theologians, right, agree that the earthly paradise is in the east, and that's America. I have already described my ideas concerning this hemisphere and its form. I have no doubt that it could pass below the equinoctial line after reaching the highest point of which I have spoken. I should find a much milder temperature and a variation in the stars and in the water. Not that I suppose that elevated point to be navigable, nor even that there is water there. Indeed, I believe it is impossible to ascend thither, because I am convinced that it is the spot of the earthly paradise. Again, this is for your reference. This is Columbus' third voyage. He's in South America, terra firme. He had just passed Trinidad, the island of Trinidad, and he's in Orinoco. He's talking about the fresh water that comes out of the Orinoco, right? And this is where he's at, and he's letting us know that I believe it is impossible to ascend thither, because I am convinced that it is the spot of the earthly paradise, whither no one can go but by God's permission. But this land which your highness have now sent me to explore is very extensive, and I think there are many other countries in the south of which the world has never had any knowledge. I do not suppose that the earthly paradise is in the form of a rugged mountain, as the descriptions of it have made it appear, but that it is on the summit of the spot, which I have described as being in the form of the stalk of a pear. The approach to it from a distance must be by a constant and gradual ascent. But I believe that, as I have already said, no one could ever reach the top. I think also that the water I have described may proceed from it, though it be far off, and that stopping at the place which I have just left, it forms this lake. So he's saying the water he's describing was the Orinoco River, and he's saying that the Orinoco River is coming from the earthly paradise, whatever that mountain or high place he's saying. And we know We know it's coming from Mount Roraima, an ancient tree stump. So, in regards to the earthly paradise or the Garden of Eden, it says here in a book, Narrative and Critical History of America, edited by Justin Windsor from the Harvard University, Volume 2. It says, as he approached the coast, Columbus wrote, he heard in the dead of a night an awful roaring. So this is when he took his voyage over to the Tierra Firme, which they called South America, and when he reached the Orinoco River down in South America. And this is his description of what happened when he did. It says he saw the sea rolling from west to east like a mountain as high as the ship, and approaching little by little. On the top of this rolling sea came a mighty wave of roaring with a frightful noise. When he entered the gulf and he saw how it was filled by the flow of the great river, he believed that he had witnessed far out at the sea the mighty struggle at the meeting of fresh with salt water. The river, he was persuaded, must be rushing down from the summit of the earth, where the Lord had planted the earthly paradise. In this midst whereof was a fountain, whence flowed the four great rivers of the world, the Ganges, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Nile. He did not quite agree with those earlier philosophers who believed that the earth was a perfect sphere, but rather that it was like the form of a pear, which is very round except where the stalk grows, at which part it is most prominent. There are great indications of this being the terrestrial paradise, continues Columbus, for its site coincides with the opinion of the holy and wise theologians whom I have mentioned again. So not only did he find some kind of evidence to make him link the earthly paradise there, but he's also saying that it coincides with the opinion of the holy and wise theologians. All right, so they've always known it's there, right? The mythical Hesperides, the Garden of Eden, the terrestrial paradise. We've always been talking about this side of the world over here. We're talking about American, right? And moreover, the other evidences agree with the supposition, for I have never either read or heard of fresh water coming in so large a quantity in close conjunction with the water of the sea. The idea is also corroborated by the blankness of the temperature. And if the water of which I speak does not proceed from the earthly paradise, it seems to be still greater wonder, for I do not believe that there is any river in the world so large or so deep. Again, in the book Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with the original documents saved by the Hallyope Society, Columbus continues when he's in his third voyage, and basically in the Dragon's Mouth is called a bay, in the Orinoco River, and how so much fresh water is coming out of it that it has to be coming from the terrestrial paradise, it says. And I think that if the river mentioned does not proceed from the terrestrial paradise, it comes from an immense tract of land situated in the south, of which no knowledge has been hitherto obtained. But the more I reason on the subject, the more satisfied I become that the terrestrial paradise is situated in the spot I have described, and I ground my opinion upon the arguments and authorities already quoted. May it please the Lord to grant your highness a long life and health and peace to follow out so noble an investigation. Right. Just to correlate with that, I wanted to read from this book. It's called The American Past, a Survey of American History, Volume 1 to 1877. And so it says here, feeding the world. America contributed few food animals to world larders, but American plant foods revolutionized European, African, and Asian diets, all right, even African. Maize, Indian corn, and American native astonished Europeans by the height of its stalks and the size of its grain. Cultivation of the crop spread to every continent, increasing the food supply and contributing to the runaway increase in population that characterizes the last 500 years of human history. So you see how important corn was, just corn alone. And if you saw my corn videos, it proves this is the old world. The beginning of a civilization was through agriculture, and you just read it right here in this book. It's telling us because of the increase of food supply that it creates. This plant, this miracle plant, right? The plant of the gods, the sacred tree in a lot of these places in the old world is actually a maize plant or a corn plant. All right. So let's continue. It says the sweet potato became a staple in West Africa. All right. So even the sweet potato, it became a staple in West Africa, where it was introduced by slave traders. So it happened the opposite way, he's saying. All right. The jam, superficially similar, was already established there. Okay, so they had jam. It says beans, squash, and pumpkins, peppers, strawberries. There was a European strawberry, but it was inferior to the American. And then vanilla, chocolate, wild rice, and tomatoes are American foods. All those foods you heard, right? That were unknown in Europe, Africa, and Asia before 1492, it says there, right? I highly doubt that, honestly. I know that these foods were probably there longer. Way before 1492, but they did originate from America. Now listen to this part. Of 640 food crops grown in Africa today, almost 600 of them originated in the Americas. Again, of 640 food crops grown in Africa today, almost 600 of them originated in the Americas. So you're saying only 40 of them did not? So 600 of their food crops are American of origin. So what does that tell you? Who is older? Where did it originate? All right, so who was growing food first? These kind of plants. Who domesticated all these plants first? That means who was doing agriculture first. That means who created the first civilizations. All right, all correlating, right? It says the manioc, tapioca, also of American origin, is today a staple for 200 million people in the tropics. Again, the manioc, the tapioca, also of American origin, is today a staple for 200 million people in the tropics. The white Irish potato, a native of the Andes, provides basic subsistence for even greater numbers. All right, so the potato, it's not Irish, it's from here, right? This is the true old world. So thank you once again for being here. All right.
Hey, 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 hey. Wow.